Winter in medieval Europe was not merely a season. It was a test of endurance, ingenuity, and sheer survival. For the vast majority of people, life was governed by the rhythms of nature, and the arrival of frost and snow could mean the difference between life and death. For peasants, the onset of winter began long before the first snow fell. Preparation was a year-round activity, dictated by the cycles of farming, animal husbandry, and household management. Crops were harvested in autumn, and these meagre stores were carefully rationed to last through the months when the soil was frozen and the fields were barren. Grain was stored in wooden bins or clay jars, dried thoroughly to prevent spoilage. In some regions, peasants relied on root vegetables such as turnips, carrots, and parsnips, which could be kept in cool, dark cellars for months. Preserving food was a delicate balance. Too little and starvation loomed. Too much and rot would ruin their hard work. The diet of a medieval peasant in winter was meagre and repetitive. Bread made from coarse grains, barley, rye, or oats was a staple, often supplemented with dried legumes, onions, or cabbage. Meat was a rarity for the poor, usually limited to a salted portion from the communal slaughter in late autumn. Milk and cheese from cows, goats, or sheep could provide nutrition, but often these supplies dwindled as animals became leaner in winter months. Wild foods, berries, nuts, mushrooms, and even moss were gathered when available, and foraging sometimes required venturing into snow-covered forests, risking exposure and encounters with predators. Shelter was perhaps the most critical factor in survival. Peasant homes were modest, constructed from wattle and daub, timber, or stone with thatched roofs. These houses were often cramped, dark, and poorly insulated, offering minimal protection from icy winds and snowdrifts. Peasants coped by clustering together within the space, sharing body heat in cold rooms, and sleeping on straw-filled mattresses or rush-covered floors. Hearths were the heart of the home, not only for cooking, but for warmth. Fires were maintained continuously, fueled by wood, peat, or dung, and great skill went into keeping them alive without exhausting the household's limited fuel supply. Clothing was another line of defence against the cold, but warmth came at a premium. The poorest peasants wore garments made from coarse wool, linen, or animal hides, often layered to trap body heat. Hoods, cloaks, and fur-lined caps were essential, and many households improvised additional warmth by patching old clothing or stuffing garments with straw. Hands and feet were particularly vulnerable, and leather boots, woolen stockings and gloves, or makeshift coverings, were worn whenever possible. Despite these efforts, frostbite and hypothermia were constant threats, particularly for those working outdoors or travelling to distant fields or markets. Communal life played a pivotal role in winter survival. Villages were small, tight-knit communities where cooperation was a matter of necessity. Families shared firewood, livestock, and knowledge of foraging or herbal remedies. Communal barns and granaries stored grain collectively, ensuring that no single household faced total ruin. Winter festivals and religious gatherings, such as Yule or Christmas, offered brief relief from daily hardships. These occasions allowed peasants to share the last of their food stores, celebrate, and reinforce social bonds that were essential for survival through the harsh months. The work of winter was relentless, despite the snow and ice. Fields were fallow, but livestock required constant care. Cattle, sheep, and pigs had to be fed, sheltered, and protected from predators. Horses and oxen, essential for ploughing and transport, also needed food and warmth. Fetching water could be a laborious task if rivers froze or wells were covered in ice, and frozen roads complicated trade or access to markets. survival required careful planning. Food had to be rationed, chores prioritised, and risks weighed carefully. One misstep could mean illness, injury, or death. Medical care in winter was rudimentary, and disease thrived in cramped, cold conditions. Respiratory infections, frostbite, and malnutrition were common threats. Herbal remedies, poultices, and midwives were the first line of defence, but serious illness often proved fatal. Communities developed strategies to mitigate disease, separating the sick, boiling water, or relying on faith and prayers to protect against supernatural causes. In many ways, survival was as much about managing illness and injury as it was about procuring food and warmth. Winter travel posed extraordinary dangers. Roads were treacherous, and snowstorms could isolate villages for days or weeks. Traders and messengers risked frostbite, starvation, or attacks by bandits and wolves. Travellers carried provisions, rudimentary maps, and sometimes weapons for protection. In the absence of modern infrastructure, survival depended on knowledge of the land, the weather, and natural landmarks. The most skilled navigators, often hunters, shepherds, or local guides, were invaluable in ensuring that essential communication and trade continued through the winter months. Psychological resilience was as important as physical survival. Long, dark nights, isolation, and uncertainty weighed heavily on peasants. Superstition and religious faith offered comfort. Prayers, charms, and rituals were used to ward off misfortune and reinforce hope. Storytelling, songs, and shared work provided mental distraction and social cohesion. Maintaining morale was essential, for despair could lead to neglect of vital tasks or abandonment of survival strategies. In a world where nature held absolute power, mental fortitude often meant the difference between life and death. Peasant ingenuity also extended to the use of natural resources. Snow and ice were sometimes used for refrigeration, keeping perishables fresh longer. Bark, leaves, and moss provided insulation for animals and human dwellings. Communal workshops allowed villagers to repair clothing, tools, and equipment, extending the utility of scarce materials. Even the landscape itself was harnessed. Hillsides and forests provided shelter from winds, and frozen rivers enabled shortcuts across otherwise impassable terrain. Every detail of the environment was exploited for survival. Religious practices intertwined with survival strategies. Saints' days and holy festivals often coincided with periods when extra labour was unnecessary, providing critical rest and communal bonding. Churches served as centres of warmth, safety, and shared resources. Clergy sometimes distributed food or medicine, and faith offered a psychological framework for understanding the harshness of winter. For peasants, religion and survival were inseparable. Prayer and practical action were complementary forces in enduring the cold months. Despite these efforts, winter was not always survivable. Starvation, illness, and accidents claimed many lives. Mortality rates soared during prolonged cold snaps, crop failures, or epidemics. Communities learned through painful experience to adapt strategies, diversify food sources, and maintain social cohesion. Survival was an ongoing negotiation with nature, where careful planning, shared knowledge, and unyielding determination shaped daily life. In the end, the story of medieval winter survival is a testament to human resilience. Peasants endured conditions that would be intolerable by modern standards, relying on skill, community, and ingenuity. Their struggles highlight the fragility of life in pre-industrial society and the resourcefulness that ordinary people employed to endure extraordinary hardships. The harsh winters of medieval Europe were more than a backdrop. They defined the rhythms of life, shaped social structures, and tested the very limits of human endurance. Medieval winter survival was thus an intricate blend of preparation, adaptation, cooperation, and psychological resilience. Every meal, fire, and layer of clothing mattered. Every act of cooperation within the village strengthened the chance that the community and its members would see spring. In facing the cold, the darkness, and the scarcity, peasants exemplified a type of resilience that modern society rarely experiences, offering a glimpse into a world where survival was never guaranteed, and every winter was a battle against nature itself.